The video started playing at exactly 0800 hours on every screen across the galaxy. It was grainy and shaky, like someone had recorded it while running for their lives. The timestamp showed it was from Mining Station Omega-7, a small outpost on the edge of human space that most people had never heard of. Commander Patricia Kane paused her morning coffee as the footage began. She was aboard the USS Liberty, humanity's largest battleship, floating in space near the Mars defense grid. Around her, the bridge crew stopped their work to watch the screens. The video showed chaos. Explosions lit up a metal corridor as alien creatures poured through broken doorways. These weren't just any aliens. Kane recognized them immediately as Vex Collective soldiers. The Vex were bad news. They stood 8 feet tall, had 4 arms, and moved like deadly machines. Their gray skin looked like armor, and their red eyes glowed in the dark. When the Vex attacked a place, nothing usually survived, but someone was fighting back. A human figure appeared in the video, moving through the smoke and fire. The person wore standard military gear. Nothing special. No fancy armor or high-tech weapons. It's just regular equipment that any soldier might carry. But the way this person moved was anything but regular. The unknown fighter rolled behind a piece of broken machinery as Vex plasma bolts flew overhead. Then, in one smooth motion, they popped up and fired 3 shots. 3 Vex soldiers dropped dead. The fighter was already moving again, sliding under a low pipe, while more enemies charged forward. Kane watched in amazement as the mysterious human used everything around them as a weapon. A broken pipe became a club. Spilled fuel became a fire. Trap. Even the station's artificial gravity was turned into an advantage when the fighter somehow caused a group of Vex to float helplessly while picking them off one by one. "Who is this person?" asked Lieutenant Commander Jack Foster, Kane's second-in-command. He was a big man with 20 years of military experience, but even he looked impressed. "I have no idea," Kane replied, "but they're making the Vex look like amateurs." The video continued for 12 minutes. 12 minutes of one human fighting against what looked like 100 alien soldiers. The mysterious figure never seemed to panic. Every move had purpose. When they ran out of bullets, they used explosives. When the explosives ran out, they used the station's own systems against the invaders. At one point, the fighter led a group of Vex into the mining section. There was a bright flash, and when the smoke cleared, all the aliens were gone. The humans stood alone among the wreckage. Checking their weapon, their face was hidden by smoke and shadows throughout the entire video. The footage ended abruptly. The last image showed the mystery fighter walking toward what looked like civilian shelters, presumably to check on survivors. Kane set down her coffee cup. In 25 years of military service, she had never seen anything like it. The Vex Collective was known for overwhelming their enemies with superior numbers and brutal tactics. Their soldiers were trained from birth to fight. They had better weapons, better armor, and they never showed mercy. Yet one human had stopped them cold. "Sir," called out Communications Officer Lisa Wells from her station. "I'm getting reports from across the fleet, every ship, every station. Every military base has received this video, spreading through civilian networks too." Kane nodded. "Any word from Mining Station Omega-7? "That's the strange part, sir. According to official records, there was no distress call from Omega-7. No request for help. No military response was sent to that sector. Then how did this person get there?" Wells shook her head. "Unknown, sir. The timestamp shows this happened 3 weeks ago, but we're just seeing it now." Kane walked to the main view screen and stared. At the frozen final frame, mysterious fighters stood in profile, face still hidden. Something about their posture suggested they were young, but it was hard to tell. "Analysis," Kane ordered. Foster pulled up tactical data on his screen. Computer estimates approximately 80 to 90 Vex soldiers were neutralized. The fighting style doesn't match any standard military training. It's too ... creative, too adaptable. "Special operations?" Kane asked. That was my first thought. But I checked. No Spec Ops teams were in that sector. Besides, even our best operators follow certain patterns. This person fights like they're making it up as they go along. Kane studied the data. Foster was right. Military training taught soldiers to follow proven tactics. But this fighter seemed to ignore all the rules. They used mining equipment as weapons, turned the station's life support systems into traps, and fought in ways that no academy would ever teach. "Sir," Wells interrupted. "I'm getting a priority transmission from Earth Command," Kane returned. To her captain's chair, "Put it through." Admiral Henry Cross appeared on the main screen. He was an older man with gray hair and hard eyes. Kane had served under him early in her career and knew he didn't waste time on small talk. "Commander Kane," Cross began, "I assume you've seen the footage." "Yes, sir. We're analyzing it now." "Good. I want your best people working on identification. Find out who this person is." "Sir, if I may ask, why the urgency? It's impressive footage, but—" Cross leaned forward. "Because 3 days ago, the Vex launched similar attacks on 4 other human outposts. All 4 were completely destroyed. Everyone died. Omega-7 was the only station that survived, and it was because of this one person." Kane felt a chill run down her spine. For other attacks. She hadn't heard about those. "The information is classified for now," Cross continued. "But the Vex are moving faster than we expected. Our tactics are improving. We need every advantage we can get, and this mystery fighter might be our best hope." The transmission ended, leaving Kane and her crew in silence. Around them, other officers were still watching replays of the video on their personal screens. The footage was already becoming famous across human space. On the civilian networks, news anchors were calling the unknown fighter the ghost of Omega-7. Forums buzzed with theories about who they might be. Some thought it was a secret government, super soldier. Others believed it was an alien ally fighting alongside humans. Few even suggested it might be a robot or artificial intelligence. Military recruitment offices ported long lines of young people wanting to sign up. Everyone wanted to be like the mysterious hero. Sales of military gear increased as civilians tried to copy the fighter's equipment. The video had inspired hope across human space at a time when hope was becoming rare. But Kane knew something that the public didn't. The Vex weren't just random raiders anymore. They were organizing, planning. The attacks on the 5 mining stations were just the beginning of something much larger and more dangerous. She watched the video one more time, focusing on every detail. The way the fighter moved suggested extensive training, but not the kind taught in any military she knew. Their tactics were too unusual, too creative. It was almost like they had learned to fight in a completely different environment. "Foster," she called out. "Yes, sir. I want you to pull all the data we have on mining station Omega-7. Personnel records, supply shipments, everything. Also, check for any unauthorized ship movements in that sector over the past month. Looking for how our mystery fighter got there, among other things. Someone that's skilled doesn't just appear out of nowhere. They had to come from somewhere, and they had to have a reason for being there." As her crew worked, Kane kept thinking about the video. Somewhere out there was a person who had single-handedly stopped a Vex assault that should have been impossible to survive. They had saved hundreds of civilian miners and shown that humanity could still fight back against overwhelming odds. But who were they? And more importantly, would they be ready when the Vex came back in greater numbers? The questions hung in the air as the USS Liberty continued its patrol. While across human space, millions of people watched the same 12 minutes of footage and wondered about the identity of their unexpected hero. Jake Morrison sat in the back row of the tactical studies classroom, trying to stay awake. Major Lisa Bell was talking about proper engagement protocols again. The same boring lecture she gave every week about following orders and sticking to approved combat methods. Jake was 19 years old and had been at the Terran Military Academy on Mars for 2 years. He was not doing well. His grades were poor, his instructors thought he was lazy, and his fellow cadets mostly ignored him. Everyone assumed he would wash out before graduation. "Morrison," Major Bell called out suddenly, "since you seem so interested in staring out the window, perhaps you can tell us the correct response to a numerically superior enemy force." Jake looked up. 20 other cadets turned to stare at him. Rionkel, the top student in their class, smirked. Amy Parker, who always followed every rule perfectly, shook her head in disapproval. "A request backup and withdraw to a defensive position," Jake answered. "Correct." "And why is that the proper response?" Jake thought about the real answer. Yes. Military doctrine was written by people who never had to fight alone, because sometimes backup never comes. Because sometimes the only choice is to improvise or die. "Because the manual says so, sir," he said instead. Major Bell frowned. "Yes. Morrison, because decades of military experience have proven it works. I suggest you spend more time studying approved tactics and less time daydreaming." The class ended 20 minutes later. Jake gathered his books and headed for the door. As he walked through the hallway, other cadets whispered about the famous video that everyone was talking about. Ghost of Omega-7 had become a legend in just 3 weeks. Military analysts were studying every second of the footage. News programs played it constantly. Jake had watched it too, of course. Everyone had. But unlike the others, he remembered every detail perfectly. He remembered the smell of burning metal and alien blood. He remembered the weight of his rifle and the heat from the plasma explosions. He remembered the fear in the miners' voices when he found them hiding in the emergency shelters. Most of all, he remembered making the choice to fight alone. "Cadet Morrison," a voice called behind him. Jake turned to see Sergeant Kim Davis, one of the Academy's administrative staff. She looked nervous. "You need to report to the Commandant's office immediately," she said. Jake's stomach dropped. Had been expecting this for weeks. Someone had figured out where he had really been during his 3-day absence. He had told everyone it was a family emergency, but the Academy didn't check stories like that very carefully. They had bigger things to worry about. The walk to the administrative building felt like a death march. Other cadets stared as he passed. Word traveled fast in a place like the Academy. By dinner time, everyone would know that Jake Morrison was in serious trouble. The Commandant's office was on the top floor of the main building. Jake had never been there before. He knocked on the door and waited. "Enter," came a voice from inside. Jake opened the door and froze. The office wasn't empty except for the Commandant. Admiral Henry Cross sat behind the desk wearing his full uniform with all his medals. Next to him stood a woman Jake didn't recognize, but her civilian clothes and serious expression suggested intelligence services. "Cadet Morrison," Admiral Cross said. "Please, sit down." Jake sat in the chair across from the desk, trying to keep his hands from shaking. This was worse than he had expected. Admirals didn't personally handle disciplinary cases for failing. "Cadets, this is Director Carol Stevens from Intelligence," Cross continued. "We need to ask you some questions." Stevens activated a small device on the desk. "This conversation is being recorded and classified at the highest levels. Do you understand?" Nodded. Cross leaned forward. 3 weeks ago, you were absent from the Academy for 3 days. You reported a family emergency on New Montana, is that correct? "Yes, sir." Stevens touched her tablet, and the wall screen came to life. It showed a star map with various routes marked in different colors. "These are the fastest travel routes. From Mars to New Montana. Even with military transport, the journey takes 4 days each way. You were gone for 3 days total." Jake said nothing. Cross stood up and walked to another screen. "This is more interesting," he said, activating the display. It showed the famous video from mining station Omega-7. I assume you've seen this. "Footage? Everyone has, sir." "Indeed. Now, this is what most people haven't seen." Cross switched to a different display showing technical readouts and sensor data. Long-range sensors tracked all ship movements in the Omega-7 sector during the time of the attack. One vessel, a requisitioned supply shuttle, arrived 12 hours before the Vex assault began. Stevens took over. The shuttle's identification codes were scrambled, but we recovered enough data to trace its origin. It was taken from Supply Depot. Charlie 7, approximately 6 hours from Mars. Jake's mouth went dry. Cross returned to his seat. The shuttle was found drifting in space 2 days later, its navigation systems wiped clean. Whoever used it knew how to cover their tracks, but they made one mistake. The screen changed again, showing biological scan data, emergency life support. Systems on that shuttle recorded biometric data, heart rate, breathing patterns, stress indicators. We compared that data to the medical records of every person with access to Supply Depot Charlie 7. Stevens smiled coldly. There was only one match. Cadet Jake Morrison of the Terran Military Academy. The room fell silent. Jake stared at his hands, knowing his secret was finally out. He had known this day would come eventually. He couldn't steal a military shuttle and fight aliens without someone noticing. So, Cross continued, let me ask you again. Where were you 3 weeks ago? Jake looked up at the two most powerful people he had ever met. They already knew the truth. There was no point in lying anymore. Mining Station Omega-7, he said quietly. Stevens leaned forward. Why? Jake took a deep breath. Was monitoring emergency frequencies during a late-night study session. Picked up a distress signal from Omega-7. They were reporting Vex scouts in their sector and requesting immediate assistance. There was no official distress call logged, Cross said. I know, sir. Check the official channels. Nothing, but I heard the transmission myself. The miners were scared. They said more ships were coming. Stevens made notes on her tablet. So you decided to steal a shuttle and investigate personally? I tried to report it through proper channels first, but it was the middle of the night. The duty officer said he would look into it in the morning. By then it would have been too late. Cross studied Jake carefully. He realized that intercepting a Vex assault force was impossible. Even our best special operations teams work in groups of 12 or more. I wasn't planning to fight them, sir. I thought I could evacuate the civilians before the main attack arrived, but you did fight them. Jake nodded. When I got there, the assault had already begun. The Vex were inside the station. There were 300 miners trapped in the emergency shelters. No one was coming to help them. Stevens activated the video again. So you decided to take on approximately 90 Vex soldiers by yourself? I didn't have a choice. Cross stood up and walked to the window overlooking the academy grounds. Tell me about your background, Morrison. Your real background? Jake knew what he meant. I grew up on New Montana. It's a frontier world. My father was Marcus Morrison, former Special Forces. He taught me to hunt and fight before I could properly read. New Montana has hostile wildlife, Stevens noted. Yes, ma'am? And sometimes hostile aliens too, not Vex, but other species that didn't like humans settling in their territory. Dad taught me that conventional tactics don't work when you're outnumbered and outgunned. You have to be creative. Cross turned back around. Creative. Is that what you call it? Jake thought about the fight at Omega-7, using the mining equipment as weapons, turning the station's own systems against the invaders, fighting in ways that no military academy would ever approve of. Sir, I learned to fight from someone who survived 20 years of special operations missions. He always said that the enemy expects you to follow the rules. When you don't, you have an advantage. Stevens made more notes. And that's how you defeated a force that should have been impossible to beat. I didn't defeat them, ma'am. I just held them off long enough for the miners to escape. Most of the Vex retreated when they realized they weren't going to win easily. Cross sat back down. Morrison, do you understand that your unauthorized actions could result in a court-martial, theft of military property, unauthorized combat operations, violation of chain of command? Jake nodded. Yes, sir. However, Cross continued, there are some factors in your favor. You saved 300 civilian lives. You provided valuable intelligence about Vex tactics. And you demonstrated combat abilities that we desperately need. Stevens closed her tablet. Jake, we're going to offer you a choice. Face the consequences of your actions through official military justice, or accept assignment to a special program. What kind of program? Cross smiled for the first time since Jake had entered the room. The kind where your particular skills might be more appreciated. Kind where creative thinking is encouraged rather than punished. Jake looked between the two officials. What would I have to do? Officially, you would remain a cadet here at the academy. 2 weeks after the meeting with Admiral Cross, Jake's life became much more complicated. During the day, he attended regular classes and pretended to struggle with basic military concepts. At night, he met with Lieutenant Commander Beth Turner. In a hidden training facility beneath the academy, Turner was different from the other officers Jake had met. She was in her early 30s, with short brown hair and intelligent green eyes that seemed to see everything. She had been a special operations commander before being assigned to Project Wildcard, and she understood unconventional warfare better than most. "Your first mission is Haven's Rest," she told Jake during one of their secret meetings. "It's an agricultural world about 3 days from here. Good farmland, peaceful people, and recently it's been getting hit by Vex raiders." Jake studied the files on his tablet. Haven's Rest looked like a nice place to live, rolling hills covered with wheat and cornfields, small farming towns connected by dirt roads. It's the kind of world where people knew their neighbors and left their doors unlocked. "How bad are the attacks?" he asked. Turner pulled up tactical reports. "Hit-and-run raids, mostly. The Vex come in fast, destroy crops and equipment, then disappear before the local garrison can respond. They're not taking prisoners or trying to hold territory, just causing damage. That doesn't sound like normal Vex behavior." "No, it doesn't. That's why you're going there. Something else is happening, and we need to figure out what." Jake read through more files. The local military commander was Colonel Frank Hayes, a career officer with 30 years of experience. The garrison had 200 soldiers and basic defensive equipment. They were good at protecting fixed positions, but couldn't catch fast-moving raiders. "What's my cover story?" Turner smiled. "You're Cadet Morrison, sent to observe and learn from experienced officers. Colonel Hayes thinks this assignment is punishment for your poor academic performance. He's not happy about babysitting a failing cadet." 3 days later, Jake found himself on a transport ship heading for Haven's Rest. The other passengers were supply clerks and replacement troops. None of them paid attention to the young cadet sitting alone in the back of the passenger compartment. Jake used the travel time to study everything he could about Haven's Rest. The planet had been settled 50 years ago by farming, families from Earth. The colonists had worked hard to build a peaceful community focused on growing food for other human worlds. They had minimal defenses because they had never needed them. The Vex attacks had started 2 months ago. Small groups of raiders would strike at random locations, usually at night. They would burn crops, destroy farming equipment, and sometimes attack isolated farmhouses. But they always left before the military could respond. When Jake arrived at the main settlement of Greenfield, Colonel Hayes was waiting for him. Hayes was a big man with gray hair and a permanent frown. He looked at Jake like he was examining a particularly unpleasant insect. "So you're the cadet they sent me?" Hayes said. "I don't know what you did to deserve this assignment, son, but I don't have time to hold your hand." "I understand, sir. I'm just here to observe and learn." Hayes led Jake through the garrison compound. It was built like a traditional military base, with thick walls and defensive positions facing outward. The soldiers looked competent but frustrated. They were trained to fight conventional battles, not chase raiders who struck and vanished. "The problem is simple," Hayes explained as they walked. "The Vex hit us and run away before we can catch them. They know our response patterns. By the time we organize a pursuit, they're long gone." Jake nodded but said nothing. He was already forming ideas about why the raids were happening, but he couldn't share them without revealing too much about his real capabilities. That evening, Jake was assigned a small room in the officers' quarters. After dinner, he slipped out of the compound and walked into the nearby farming community. He wanted to talk to the people who were actually being attacked. The first farmhouse he visited belonged to Pete and Mary Johnson, an older couple who had lived on Haven's Rest for 20 years. Their wheat fields had been burned 3 weeks earlier. "Strange," Pete told Jake as they sat on the front porch. "The Vex didn't just burn everything randomly. They seemed to know exactly which fields to hit and when." Mary brought them coffee. "Enjoying the conversation. Pete's right. They hit our north field right when the wheat was ready for harvest. If they had come a week earlier or later, the damage wouldn't have been as bad." Jake asked more questions. The pattern became clearer. With each farm he visited, the Vex weren't attacking randomly. They were hitting specific crops at specific times. They seemed to understand human agricultural cycles better than they should. Over the next week, Jake continued his double life. During the day, he accompanied Colonel Hayes on routine patrols and inspections. Hayes treated him like an incompetent, student explaining basic military concepts that Jake already understood better than most officers at night. Jake explored the farming communities. He talked to settlers, studied crop rotation schedules, and mapped the pattern of Vex attacks. Slowly, a disturbing picture emerged. The Vex weren't just raiding for supplies or causing random damage. They were studying human farming techniques. Each attack targeted a different type of crop at a different stage of growth. They were learning how humans produced food when crops were most vulnerable, and how the farming communities were organized. Jake realized this was preparation for something. It's much larger than simple raids. His suspicions were confirmed when he discovered Vex surveillance equipment hidden near several farms. The devices were small and well camouflaged, designed to monitor human activity without being detected. The raiders weren't just attacking, they were gathering intelligence. But Jake couldn't share this information with Colonel Hayes without revealing how he had found it. A failing cadet wasn't supposed to be conducting independent investigations or finding alien spy equipment that trained soldiers had missed. Instead, Jake decided to deal with the problem himself. He started by talking to the farmers about organizing their own defense network. Not as Cadet Morrison, but as a concerned young man who wanted to help protect the community. He suggested they set up communication systems between farms and watch schedules to spot raiders earlier. The farmers were skeptical at first. Most of them had never held weapons more dangerous than hunting rifles. But Jake was patient and persuasive. He taught them to use their knowledge of the local terrain as an advantage, showed them how farming equipment could be modified for defense. "You know this land better than any soldier," he told a group of farmers during a secret meeting in Pete Johnson's barn. "You know when things look wrong, when sounds are out of place. It's better than any surveillance system," Jake also began. Preparing traps and ambushes along the routes the Vex raiders typically used. He was careful to make everything look like the work of clever farmers rather than trained military personnel. Concealed pit traps disguised as irrigation ditches, explosive devices made from farming chemicals, communication networks using existing farm equipment. When the next Vex raid came, the aliens found a very different situation than they expected. The attack began at midnight, targeting the Morrison farm on the east side of Greenfield. But this time, the farmers were ready. Warning signals flashed between properties as the Vex raiders approached. Instead of helpless civilians, the aliens encountered coordinated resistance. Jake watched from a hidden position as the Vex moved into his carefully prepared killing ground. The raiders expected to find scared farmers hiding in their houses. Instead, they walked into a network of traps and ambushes that turned their own tactics against them. The farmers used modified tractors as mobile gun platforms. Irrigation systems became channels for explosive devices. Even the local wildlife was turned into an early warning system as trained farm dogs detected Vex movements and alerted their human partners. The battle lasted only 20 minutes. But it changed everything. For the first time since the raids began, the Vex suffered significant casualties. More importantly, they failed to complete their mission. The crops they targeted remained unharmed, and their surveillance equipment was discovered and destroyed. Colonel Hayes arrived with his soldiers just as the surviving Vex raiders were retreating. He found farmers standing guard over alien bodies and captured equipment, looking both surprised and proud of their victory. "How did you do this?" Hayes asked. "Pete Johnson," Pete pointed to Jake, who was helping tend to a wounded farmer. "That young man taught us how to fight back. Said we didn't have to just sit and wait for the military to protect us." Hayes looked at Jake with new interest. The failing cadet, who was supposed to be learning from experienced officers, had somehow organized the most successful defense against Vex raiders in months. Morrison Hayes called out, "I want to talk to you." As Jake walked over to the colonel, he wondered how much he could reveal without blowing his cover. The mission was successful. But keeping his secret identity was becoming more complicated with each victory. Behind them, the farmers were already talking about expanding their defense network to other communities. Word was spreading that Havens Rest had found a way to fight back against the Vex raiders. The news from Havens Rest spread quickly through military channels. For the first time in months, Human forces had successfully defeated a Vex raiding party. Military analysts studied the reports with great interest, trying to understand how. Simple farmers had managed what trained soldiers could not. Commander Patricia Kane read the reports aboard the USS Liberty with growing curiosity. The tactical summary described coordinated defensive actions that looked suspiciously familiar. The use of terrain advantages, improvised weapons, and psychological warfare reminded her of something she had seen before. "Foster," she called to her second-in-command, "look at this Haven's Rest report. Does the fighting style remind you of anything?" Lieutenant Commander Jack Foster reviewed the data on his screen. "It's similar to the Ghost of Omega-7 footage, sir. The same kind of creative tactics, same use of environment as a weapon." Kane nodded. "But the Ghost is one person. This was an entire farming community working together. Someone taught them these methods." Meanwhile, Jake was back at the Terran Military Academy, sitting through another boring lecture from Major Lisa Bell. She was explaining proper defensive formations while Jake tried to look interested. His classmates Ryan Cole and Amy Parker took careful notes. But Jake already knew more about defensive tactics than the instructor. His secret life was becoming more complicated. During the day, he pretended to struggle with basic military concepts. At night, he met with Lieutenant Commander Turner for advanced training and mission briefings. The contrast was exhausting. "Your success at Haven's Rest has attracted attention," Turner told him during one of their hidden meetings. "Command wants to send you on a more challenging mission." Jake looked at the files she handed him. New Series was an asteroid mining facility in the outer system. Unlike Haven's Rest, it was a heavily industrialized installation with thousands of workers and significant strategic value. "The Vex have established a forward base in the asteroid belt," Turner explained. "They're not just raiding anymore. They're building something. We need to know what." Jake studied the technical specifications. New Series was built inside a large asteroid, with multiple levels connected by maintenance tunnels. The facility processed rare minerals needed for advanced spacecraft construction. "What's my backup for this mission?" Turner smiled. "You'll be working with Lieutenant Sandra Clark. She's Special Operations, experienced in infiltration and sabotage. But she doesn't know about your real identity." Jake frowned. "So I have to convince a Special Operations officer to follow the lead of a failing cadet. Consider it part of your training. Learning to work with people who underestimate you is an important skill." 2 days later, Jake found himself on a stealth transport heading for the asteroid belt. Lieutenant Clark sat across from him, reviewing mission files with obvious skepticism. She was about 25 years old, with black hair and sharp brown eyes that missed nothing. "So you're the cadet they assigned to this mission," she said without looking up from her tablet. "What exactly are you supposed to do while I handle the actual work?" Jake had prepared for this attitude. "Observe and learn, ma'am. Maybe help with basic tasks if needed." Clark finally looked at him. "This is a dangerous mission, cadet. We're infiltrating an active Vex base. One mistake could get us both killed. Try to stay out of my way." The transport dropped them at a supply depot 3 hours from New Series. From there, they would use a maintenance shuttle to approach the asteroid facility without being detected. The plan was simple: get inside, gather intelligence about the Vex base, and get out. But plans rarely survive contact with the enemy. As their shuttle approached New Series, they discovered the situation was worse than expected. The Vex hadn't just established a forward base. They'd completely taken over the mining facility. Human workers were being held prisoner, forced to operate the mining equipment under alien supervision. "This changes everything," Clark whispered as they watched Vex soldiers patrolling the facility through their shuttle's sensors. "We need to abort and call for backup." Jake studied the layout of the facility on his portable scanner. He could see patterns in the Vex security arrangements that reminded him of their tactics at Omega-7. They were confident, maybe overconfident. They expected humans to follow predictable military responses. "What if we don't abort?" Jake asked quietly. Clark stared at him. "Are you insane? There are at least 50 Vex soldiers down there, plus whatever they're building in the main mining chamber, or 2 people with basic equipment." Sometimes two people can do things that a larger force can't, Jake said, remembering his father's lessons about asymmetric warfare. This isn't a training exercise, Cadet. This is real combat against alien soldiers who have been fighting for longer than you've been alive. Jake nodded, but he was already forming a plan. The Vex had taken over a human facility, which meant they were operating in an environment designed for human use. They would have advantages, but they would also have blind spots. Lieutenant, what? If I told you I might know a way to get inside without being detected. Clark looked at him suspiciously. What are you talking about? Jake pointed to his scanner display. The ventilation system.
Ow.
It's designed for human-sized maintenance workers. The Vex are too big to use those passages effectively, so they probably aren't guarding them heavily. Even if we could get inside, we're still vastly outnumbered. You don't have to fight all of them. We just need to gather intelligence and maybe cause enough confusion to help the prisoners escape. Clark was quiet for several minutes, studying the facility layout. Finally, she sighed. You know what? Command did say this mission was important. You're right, that a small team might be able to infiltrate where a larger force would be detected. Spent the next hour planning their approach. Clark was impressed, despite herself, by Jake's understanding of facility layouts and security procedures. He seemed to know things about infiltration tactics that weren't taught in basic cadet courses. The infiltration went better than expected. Jake led them through maintenance tunnels that the Vex had ignored, moving with confidence that surprised Clark when they encountered sensor systems. Jake seemed to know exactly how to disable them without triggering alarms. Where did you learn to do that? Clark whispered, as Jake bypassed another security checkpoint. Basic electronics training, Jake replied. It's not mentioning that his father had taught him advanced sabotage techniques during his childhood on New Montana. They reached the main mining chamber and discovered something that changed everything. The Vex weren't just using the facility to mine asteroids. They were building ships. Dozens of attack vessels were under construction, using human mining equipment and enslaved human workers. But that wasn't the worst part. Clark pointed to a display screen showing tactical data in Vex language. Even without translation, the star maps were clear. The fleet being built at New Ceres was intended for a massive assault on Earth's solar system. We need to get this information back to command immediately, Clark said. Jake was studying the facility's power systems. What if we could stop them here instead? Stop them? There are hundreds of Vex workers and soldiers here. We can't possibly fight that many. Hey, Jake smiled. We don't have to fight them. We just have to think like they do. Over the next 2 hours, Jake showed Clark how to turn the facility's own systems against the Vex. They sabotaged the mining equipment so it would overload and explode. They reprogrammed the life support systems to create confusion and panic. They even managed to free several groups of human prisoners, who gladly helped with the sabotage efforts. The climax came when Jake led Clark to the facility's main power core. By overloading the mining lasers and redirecting their output, it could cause a chain reaction that would destroy the entire Vex fleet. This is insane, Clark said as she watched Jake work with equipment that should have been beyond a cadet's understanding. Who taught you to do this? Jake paused in his work. He was tired of hiding his abilities, and Lieutenant Clark had proven herself trustworthy. Someone who believed that unconventional problems require unconventional solutions. Not an answer. Jake looked at her seriously. Lieutenant, if I tell you something classified, can you keep it secret? Clark nodded. I'm the ghost of Omega-7. For a moment, Clark just stared at him. Then she started laughing. It's very funny, Cadet. The ghost is obviously an experienced special operations soldier, not a failing academy student. Jake sighed and returned to his work on the power core. Watch and learn, Lieutenant. What happened next convinced Clark that Jake was telling the truth. The facility's destruction was a masterpiece of tactical planning and improvisation.
Jake
coordinated the sabotage efforts, led the prisoner evacuation, and fought off Vex security teams with skills that no cadet should possess. As they escaped in their shuttle while Ceres exploded behind them, Clark finally understood what she had witnessed. You really are him, aren't you? The ghost of Omega-7? Jake nodded. But that information is classified at the highest levels. Officially, I'm still just a struggling cadet who got lucky. Clark shook her head in amazement. The entire military is trying to figure out who the ghost is, and he's been sitting in academy classrooms pretending to fail tactical studies. It's more complicated than that, Jake said. The alarm sounded at 0400 hours. Jake woke up in his small cadet room at the academy, instantly alert. Emergency alarms only sounded for one reason. Earth was under attack. He rushed to the window and looked up at the night sky, even through Mars. Thin atmosphere, he could see the flashes of weapons fire in space. The Vex had arrived sooner than anyone expected. Within minutes, academy staff were running through the hallways, shouting orders. All cadets were to report to emergency stations immediately. Jake threw on his uniform and joined the stream of confused students heading for the main assembly hall. Major Lisa Bell stood at the front of the room, her face pale with worry. The Vex have launched a massive assault on Luna Prime, she announced. Our lunar base is under heavy attack. All academy training is suspended. Senior cadets will be assigned to support roles. Jake felt his stomach drop. Luna Prime was humanity's most important military base outside of Earth. If it fell, the Vex would have a clear path to attack Earth itself as the other cadets received their assignments. Jake slipped away from the group. He needed to contact Lieutenant Commander Turner immediately. This was exactly the kind of situation his secret unit was designed to handle. He found Turner in the hidden command center beneath the academy. She was surrounded by screens showing the battle around Earth's moon. The situation looked desperate. "Bad, is it?" Jake asked. Turner looked up from her displays. "Worse than we feared. The Vex brought everything they had. Over 200 attack ships, plus support vessels. Our conventional forces are being overwhelmed." Jake studied the tactical displays. The Vex fleet was using the same coordinated attack patterns he had seen at New Series and Omega 7. But this time, they had adapted their tactics. They were ready for human, unconventional warfare. "They learned from our previous encounters," Jake observed. "They're countering the creative tactics that worked before, exactly. Our special operations teams are having limited success. Have developed countermeasures for most of our irregular warfare techniques." Turner activated another screen showing Admiral Cross in the main command center. The Admiral looked older than Jake remembered, worn down by the stress of commanding a losing battle. "Jake," Turner said quietly, "Admiral Cross is considering revealing your identity. We need the ghost of Omega 7 to inspire the fleet. Morale is collapsing." Jake thought about all the secrecy, all the careful planning to keep his identity hidden. If they reveal who I am, what happens to the program? The program becomes irrelevant if humanity loses this battle. An hour later, Jake found himself standing in the Academy's main briefing room, facing every senior officer on Mars. Admiral Cross stood at the front of the room, looking grim. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cross began, "I'm about to reveal classified information of the highest level. The person known as the Ghost of Omega 7 is among us." Murmurs of surprise filled the room. Jake saw Major Bell sitting in the front row, along with his fellow cadets Ryan Cole and Amy Parker. They all looked confused about why they had been included in such a high-level briefing. "The Ghost of Omega 7, Cross continued, "is Cadet Jake Morrison." The room erupted in shocked voices. Major Bell stood up, her face red with anger. "That's impossible. Morrison is one of my worst students. He can barely pass basic tactical courses." Admiral Cross activated the wall screens. They showed Jake's mission reports from Haven's Rest and New Series, along with detailed analysis of his combat methods. "Cadet Morrison has been operating under deep cover for the past 2 months, Cross explained. His poor academic performance was deliberate misdirection. In reality, he has successfully completed multiple classified missions against the Vex." Jake watched his classmates' faces as the truth sank in. Ryan Cole looked like someone had hit him with a brick. Amy Parker stared at Jake as if seeing him for the first time. "This is unbelievable," Major Bell said. "Morrison, is this true?" Jake stood up. "Yes, ma'am. I apologize for the deception, but it was necessary for operational security." Cross took control of the briefing again. "Due to the current emergency, Cadet Morrison is being promoted to the rank of Major and given command of the newly formed Irregular Warfare Division. His mission is to coordinate unconventional attacks against the Vex fleet. The next few hours passed in a blur. Jake found himself wearing a major's uniform, standing in the fleet command center, surrounded by officers who had never heard of him 12 hours earlier. Some looked skeptical, others hopeful, and a few seemed angry about the sudden changes. Battle around Luna Prime was going badly. Human ships were being destroyed faster than they could be replaced. The Vex fleet was methodically destroying the lunar base's defenses, preparing for the final assault on Earth. Major Morrison, Admiral Cross said, "What do you recommend?" Jake studied the tactical displays. The Vex had learned from their previous defeats. They were staying in tight formations, covering each other's weaknesses, and refusing to be drawn into the kind of chaotic battles where human creativity could triumph. "They're fighting smart," Jake said. "They're not giving us opportunities to use unconventional tactics. So what do we do?" Jake smiled. "We give them exactly what they expect, and then do something completely different." His plan was audacious. Instead of trying to match the Vex fleet in direct combat, Jake proposed using the solar system itself as a weapon. Civilian ships would be converted into decoys. Mining vessels would become improvised bombers. Even the orbital habitats around Mars would play a role in the deception. "This is insane," said Admiral Cross. "You're asking us to risk everything on a strategy that has never been attempted. Admiral, conventional strategies aren't working. The Vex have adapted to them. We need to do something they can't predict or counter." The plan required precise timing and coordination across the entire solar system. Jake worked with commanders throughout human space, explaining his strategy and convincing them to trust in methods that violated every rule of space warfare. Lieutenant Sandra Clark volunteered to lead one of the most dangerous parts of the mission. She would command a squadron of converted civilian ships in a direct assault on the Vex flagship. "Are you sure about this?" Jake asked her during the final briefing. Clark smiled. "I've seen what you can do with impossible odds. If anyone can make this work, it's you." The battle began 18 hours after Jake's promotion. Human forces appeared to retreat from Luna Prime, falling back toward Mars in apparent defeat. The Vex fleet pursued, confident they were winning, but the retreat was carefully planned misdirection. As the Vex ships moved deeper into the solar system, they found themselves surrounded by threats they hadn't expected. Asteroid mining stations opened fire with industrial lasers. Cargo haulers revealed hidden missile launchers. Even passenger liners had been converted into improvised warships. Jake coordinated the entire operation from the command center on Mars. He watched as his unconventional fleet used every dirty trick he could think of. Ships pretended to surrender, then exploded when Vex boarding parties came aboard. Decoy vessels led enemy squadrons into asteroid fields where human forces waited in ambush. The Vex tried to adapt, but Jake's strategy was based on chaos and unpredictability. Every time they thought they understood the human tactics, something new surprised them. The turning point came when Clark's squadron broke through the Vex defensive lines and attacked their command ship. Using techniques Jake had taught her, she managed to disable the vessel that was coordinating the entire Vex fleet without central command. The Vex formations began to break apart. Individual ship commanders made different decisions, destroying the coordination that had been their greatest strength. Jake pressed the advantage, ordering attacks from every direction at once. The Vex found themselves fighting not one battle, but dozens of separate engagements, each one different from the others. When the dust settled, the Vex fleet was in full retreat. They had lost over half their ships and failed to capture Luna Prime. More importantly, they had learned that humans could still surprise them, even when they thought they were prepared for anything. After the battle, Jake was offered any position he wanted in the military hierarchy. Admiral Cross suggested making him a full admiral in charge of fleet operations. Other officers recommended giving him command of all special operations forces. "Thank you, sir," Jake said, "but I'd like to stay with the irregular warfare division. There are more people like me out there, people who think differently. They need someone to teach them how to turn that into an advantage." 6 months later, Jake stood in front of a new class at the Terran Military Academy. But this wasn't a regular class. These were students who had been identified as creative thinkers, rule breakers, and unconventional problem solvers. Welcome to Advanced Irregular Tactics, Jake told them. Some of you probably got here because your instructors thought you were troublemakers. Others might be here because you failed standard tactical courses. He looked out at the eager faces. Some reminded him of himself 2 years ago, uncertain and underestimated. I'm here to tell you that there's nothing wrong with thinking differently. The universe is full of problems that can't be solved by following standard procedures. Your job is to learn how to turn creativity into a weapon. A young cadet in the front row raised her hand.